Hey, it's Rich DeSisto back in the basement, about to go into the bunker. If you love the Beatles, you're going to love this episode. Hey, what's going on? It's Rich DeSisto. Welcome to the bunker, episode 4, coming to you from the basement. I'm spending a lot of my time self-isolating and cranking up the tunes from my music collection. Oh, and by the way, as you can see, the hair's getting a little longer and the beard a little grayer, but I'm having a good time. And I want to take this opportunity to say thank you for those who've watched the first 3 episodes so far and also commented on social media. A big shout out to Michelle, Bill, Greg, Barry, also Ike, Harry, Patricia, Sarah, Linda, Tina, Trish, Joanne, Steve, Judy, Tom, Binky, Donna. The list goes on, and it's much appreciated. But if this is your first time, welcome as I travel through my vinyl collection alphabetically, episodes 1, 2, and 3 focused on the letter A. And if you need to rewatch or watch them for the first time, you can binge on my Facebook, YouTube, or LinkedIn account. But this episode, episode 4, we're going to dive headfirst into the letter B. Now, there are many recordings in my collection that I can start off with when it comes to the letter B, but today is May 8th. 50 years ago today, there was a release that was the finale to a phenomenon. So we couldn't pass up the opportunity to feature the Beatles, Let It Be. And I couldn't talk about the Fab Four without the man who knows all things Beatles. He's a friend and a coworker at 102.9 MGK in Philadelphia. He also happens to be the host of Breakfast with the Beatles Sunday. It's André Gardner.
Oh, Rich, peace and love, brother. Peace and love.
And looking good in your home studio there.
Well, thank you. It doesn't hold a candle to the bunker, but we get it done in here. Very disorganized, very messy, but the key is I know where everything is.
Exactly right. So 50 years ago today, May 8th, 1970, Let It Be was released, and without some turbulence, right?
No, there was plenty of turbulence going on at the time. January 1969, when the band first got together at Twickenham Studios, a very cold, unsoulful place to try to make music. They thought maybe some magic would happen as they started jamming on oldies and demoing songs that they had just written. But it soon dissolved into chaos. Some of the old tensions from the White Album that were left over brewed back up again. You had Paul still sort of taking the impromptu leadership role, much to the Jonesmen of the other Beatles, not big fans of Paul leading them. You had George, who was certainly resentful of Paul telling him what to do, what to play. You had John and Yoko sort of joined at the hip. John was, we didn't know it at the time, but John was going through some pretty heavy problems with heroin withdrawal. And, Ringo just trying to keep the peace. But it only lasted about 8 days. They started on January 2nd, 1969, but by January 10th, the tensions grew to a head. And George Harrison walked in after lunch, presumably after an argument with John, we still don't know the story, and announced he was quitting the band. I'm leaving now. And John said, when? And George goes, now. And all of a sudden, the available tape that us bootleg fans have cuts right off. And then in the most unfeeling way, George walks off the Twickenham set. And John goes, I wonder if Eric Clapton's available. Just absolutely tense. So they took a 12-day break. And they resumed filming and recording at the Apple Studios in the basement on January 22nd, where George brought in perhaps the ultimate peacemaker to help the band sort of get through this, Billy Preston, who provided some really, really good keyboard work.
Indeed.
Also was a kindred spirit and definitely a guy who was able to keep things a little tempered during that rather tense time.
And they brought in Phil Spector too to do the final engineering or the final producing there. Not he got the credit for it, not George Martin, which was kind of strange.
That's true. Although it's interesting when you see the film, you do see George Martin walking around. He's in the basement at Apple, but he's just more of a consultant than anything. Those tapes sat around for almost a year, and the Beatles decided to get Phil Spector in to try to fix it up. They had first brought in Glyn Johns, the legendary producer, worked with The Who and Clapton and such. And Glyn actually made 2 versions of an album that he presented to the Beatles. At the time, it was called Get Back. And the Beatles rejected both of them. Even though the whole concept was to show the Beatles loose in the studio with no overdubs, warts and all. the Glyn Johns version of the album was maybe too wart-filled for the Beatles to consider release. And it really was a much looser presentation than what Phil Spector ended up with. But Phil came on the scene in early 1970 and really made it an actual album, although it wasn't without lots of edits and overdubs of choirs and strings on the final version. But that is the version that we know today is Let It Be.
You bring up the strings. Paul wasn't happy with the strings addition to The Long and Winding Road, and he actually kind of fought not to have that version on the album, but inevitably he lost that fight, right?
Right. He wrote a real nasty note about don't ever mess with my stuff again. And what we found out when listening to the master tapes of the recording is Phil put the strings on the master tape and erased a couple of Paul's bass parts to put the strings on. So if I were Paul, I'd be a little ticked off too.
Now, we got Get Back coming out in September, hopefully. Can you talk a little bit about what that project is all about?
Well, that's very exciting. Peter Jackson, of course, renowned director, has been commissioned to put this whole thing together. We might be getting an announcement any day if we haven't already. But I think the plan this time is to show the film and show the Beatles in a little more upbeat sense. The version that Michael Lindsay Hogg put together in 1970, let's face it, it was pretty depressing to watch. I mean, you were watching the breakup of a band right before your eyes. You saw sniping, George leaving the group for a time, and it really wasn't a pleasant experience. But of course, in typical Beatles fashion, once it was decided, well, we're not going to do a concert, we're not going to do a show on the ship, let's just go on to the roof at Apple and do a performance. Once they went up on top of the roof on Savile Row for 33 minutes or whatever it was, the magic was there. The four Beatles playing for everybody with Billy Preston, and it's just undeniable their incredible talent when they all get together.
You kind of couldn't tell if there was some, turmoil going on within the band behind the scenes. They looked like they were really enjoying themselves up there.
They did. I think that, they realized this was their last chance. Filming was just about to finish. So let's do it the way we've always done it, fellas. Get up on stage and perform to some office workers and some Apple people and the people down the street below who really weren't exactly sure what was going on, what those noises were. But when you listen back to the tape, you still hear how exciting the performance was, how tight it was. I mean, they did spend a whole lot of time rehearsing those songs, particularly in the week leading up to that rooftop performance on the 30th. So they were prepared to give a great show.
And thanks to Alan Parsons for wiring that whole thing.
Yes, that's right. Alan Parsons had to rescue the Apple studio because when the Beatles went from Twickenham to Apple in that 12-day time period when George left, he thought, well, the studio is going to be ready. You just go in Apple Studios. Magic Alex put everything together, and it'll be just fine. Well, Alan Parsons walked in. He said, this is a disaster. We can't make a record in here. So he had to go junk the original board that Magic Alex made and rent one from EMI Studios to bring in to use in the Apple Studio.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Can't believe it's been 50 years, Andre. I want to thank you so much for spending time with us here in the bunker and celebrating the 50th anniversary of Let It Be. Remember, you can catch Andre live on the air weekday afternoons on 102.9 MGK in Philadelphia from 2 to 7, and then nationwide each week with Breakfast with the Beatles Sunday. Thanks, brother, man. Appreciate it.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. Peace and love, brother. Peace and love.
Peace and love. Be safe.
You too.
So as we self-isolate, we have more time on our hands and do more things more frequently, right? Watch more TV, listen to more radio, check out some new podcasts. Well, a new podcast on my list is from Alan Alda. Yeah, Hawkeye Pierce from MASH, that Alan Alda. The name of his podcast is called Clear and Vivid with Alan Alda. He talks to everybody. Most recently, he spoke to Sir Paul McCartney about just about anything, including writing songs. Here's Paul telling Alan about the dream.
She came to me in the dream. She came to me, and because she was such a great woman who I admired so much, and she gave me such a feeling of peace. It was like, oh, wow. And in a dream, you're really there. You don't ever think, oh, well, sometimes I do, but hardly ever think, oh, I'm dreaming, wait a minute. If you're jumping off a cliff, you might think, this is okay. But she came to me, and she seemed to be able to see the state I was in, and she said, don't worry, son. It'll be all right. Just let it be. And I remember feeling so comforted with that and so emotional. I just thought, oh, great. It's a real mother-son thing. She comforted me. So I woke up and I thought, what was that she said? Let it be. Well, that's kind of it. That's good. That's a nice phrase. So I sat down at the piano, sitting at my piano, and wrote Let It Be.